with the letter shapes that they relate to. And in order for a child to be able to acquire new words and to be able to read and spell those words, there's lots of skills that they need to have and lots of activities that they need to be able to do. They need to be able to break down words into their smaller chunks, so into syllables or into the individual sounds within words. They need to be able to recognize patterns within words. We recognize the patterns within words that sound the same, so that gives us an idea of how we might spell those. So if you hear an unfamiliar word, if it's got sounds or chunks of sounds that you recognize, then you might have a go at being able to spell it. Obviously, they need to have good memory skills. They need to be able to remember the things that they've heard and remember and relay those when they're thinking about how to produce them or how to write them. They need to have that letter sound knowledge. So being able to make the letter shape that goes along with the sound. And they also need to have good physical skills, obviously, if they're going to be able to write those letters. Can I have the next slide, please? So phonological awareness skills kind of sit on top of a raft of other communication skills that a child needs. They need to have developed quite a lot of communication skills. And if children are struggling with the speech sounds at the top of this pyramid, we may need to look at the skill level in those earlier skills. Do they have the listening and attention skills to actually be able to focus on the things that they're hearing? And are they paying attention to the same things that we want them to pay attention to? Are they able to remember and make links between the things that they're hearing? Are they able to make decisions around the things that they're hearing? So, very early skills in listening and attention are things like the easiest version is, presence and absence of a sound, music on versus music off. So those are all the musical statues or musical chairs types games where we're dancing around when we hear the music and we stop when the music stops. Then we can make things a little bit harder by having to make a decision about what we're hearing. So loud music, we go fast, quieter music, we go slow, stop when we don't hear any music at all. And these are quite easy games that we might be able to share with parents at home. They're definitely probably things that parents can do, and they can be quite active games. So even if the parents are struggling in the home learning environment to get their children to sit and do their schoolwork, we need to be helping parents to realise that lots of these sorts of active activities, active games, are still helping to develop those communication skills, those listening and attention and decision making about the sounds that we're hearing. We need to make sure that children are actually able to understand the vocabulary around some of the phonics activities that we might be getting them to do. Do they understand about beginning or end, first and last? Do they understand what middle means? Do they understand about taking things apart and putting them together, segmenting and blending? And so we need to make sure that the language skills, that children understand what we're actually asking them to do within these tasks if we're doing phonological awareness tasks. And sometimes we might be using language that's too hard for the children to understand. And we also need to make sure that children have got confidence in talking, that they are actually I've got the confidence skills to be able to talk and to join in with conversations, to have a go at answering questions, to have a go at doing activities that we're asking them to do. And if a child is reluctant to talk, doesn't have a lot of vocabulary, doesn't have that confidence to talk, then they're going to struggle to take part and to show you the skills that they have in that phonological awareness type of activity. So you might need to be taking things back and making things easier for children to join in, and maybe not even having to verbalise their answers, but be able to kind of use a visual means to support their telling you their answer, if that makes sense. So being able to point to or clap out or put counters on a page to help them take their turn in the activity, even if they're not able to join in verbally. And that might be particularly for children who are learning English as an additional language. They might have particular issues because if they've been only exposed to their home language, then that home language may not have the same sounds that we are talking about in English. So that child might actually really struggle to hear some of the sounds that we might be talking about if they haven't had that exposure to those sounds within their home language. And they'll also likely to have difficulty in making those sounds, because if they haven't heard them, they're not used in home language, then the child isn't necessarily going to be able to produce the sound the same way that you or I would. Can I have the next slide, please? So I wanted to include this phonological awareness framework to help you realise that whether a child is saying a word or whether the child is writing the word, they actually have to use the same part of the brain called the speech processing system. So if we just think about a child learning how to say a word, they need to be able to hear a word and decode those sounds. And that decoding happens in the speech processing system, which helps to break words down into the constituent parts. And it helps to build a kind of a blueprint, if you like, for that word that can be stored in the word store in the brain. And then for a child to use that word, they need to retrieve the word from the word store. It needs to go through the speech processing system again, because that puts together the sounds that are needed and also the instructions for the muscles in the body, particularly in the mouth, in order to be able to produce those sounds. And it's not just, producing one sound. If we're saying a word, there's a sequence of sounds that are joined together in that one word. And then obviously the oral muscles need to be able to move, to follow that sequence of instructions and produce the sound. So there's lots of stages that have to happen before a child is actually able to produce a word, to say a word. And when they're learning how to read and spell, it's actually the same part of the brain, that speech processing system, that is involved with them making the link between the letter shape that they might see and the sound that it goes with. The speech processing system has to link those two bits together. And if they're going to be able to write it, then coordinating those sequence of muscle movements in order to be able to form that letter shape. And whatever the child is doing, whether it's hearing and saying, whether it's seeing and writing, seeing and saying, hearing and writing, that speech processing system is vital in all of those processes. And what we need to make sure is that the children have the skills within that speech processing system to do all of those individual activities. And that's the phonological awareness skills, are the things that the speech processing system does. And in order to be able to become familiar and find things easier, then lots of repetition is really important. We need to have heard a word lots of times to have a clear store in our word store, to know how to say it. We need to have lots of practice of what those shapes look like, the sounds that go with those shapes, and how we write those sounds. And we need to have lots of practice in kind of recognizing similar chunks, if you like, so that, if we hear the sound like ist, we hear those sounds, and because we've had lots of practice, we know the letters that are likely to be in that, and we'd be able to write them. So being able to practice that lots of times will really help children to develop those skills, and so that writing becomes more automatic, spelling becomes more automatic, because rather than us always having to break things down and start from scratch, we're able to think, oh, hold on, I recognise that chunk, and I can retrieve that chunk, how to say it, spell it, and how to write it, because we'll have had that practice. As we go along, if people have got any questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat. It's a bit hard just kind of rambling on. Oh, somebody else has asked for the request, so that's good. Requested the recording sent to them. I wanted to put up this slide to give you an idea of how long it takes for a speech sound system to develop in children. Lots of people don't realise that it's actually kind of up to 6 years before a child's speech sound system is developing fully. And as their speech sound system is developing, then children will go through a range of stages where if they can't make a sound, then they will either miss it out or they'll substitute in a sound that's slightly easier. So I wanted to share those kind of ages and stages with you. So you can see that children between 2 and 3 have a very limited speech sound system, and that more of those sounds develop between 3 and 4. And then again, it's kind of slightly more sounds arrive between 4 and 5. But there are still some speech sound systems that that children are struggling with even at the age of 5+. So it's quite typical that you might have children in your year 1 class who are still struggling with some of those speech sounds. And some of the kind of phonological awareness, oh, it's getting a bit tricky to say that, or phonics programs, things like letters and sounds or read writing, they are sometimes expecting children to be able to say and to repeat some sounds that a child might actually still be struggling with. So you need to have an awareness of that. If a child isn't able to say certain speech sounds in their conversation, then they might struggle to be able to participate in some of those phonics activities, particularly where you're asking a child to repeat it, and the child might continually repeat the wrong sound, but in their head they are retrieving the right word, the right sound. It's the fact that their mouth can't actually make that sound yet, which is why they might, for instance, be always talking about a t. When you're doing a k and you're trying to help them to learn how to do a k sound, or link the letter and the letter shape with the sound, and they'll be going, yeah, and they'll be doing that lovely k, and they'll be saying t as they're doing it. So you just need to be aware that that's not because they haven't learned that letter shape, it's the fact that they're actually struggling to be able to say that sound. I hope that kind of makes sense. The other thing to think about in that the speech sound development, is that for a child to say a sound within a word, then actually that might be harder for them. So they might be able to say the sound on its own, but they might not be able to put that sound into a word. It just depends on the sounds in front and after it. Or they might be able to say it in an individual word, but when they're trying to say that word in a sentence, that the sounds go a bit wonky again, because they're trying to do so many different sequence of movements for the sentence that they're not able to get those movements made accurately enough. Now I'll have the next slide, please. I wanted to share with you that Communication Trust has developed this booklet about phonics and teaching phonics with children, and I really recommend you having a look at it, because there is lots of information in there about the difficulties that children who have some speech, language and communication needs can have when they're trying to access that phonics training, phonics activities, and the phonics check that you might be doing with the children. I'm not expecting you to be able to read that slide. I just wanted to give you an indication of what it looked like. Can I have the next slide? So this is just kind of a bit of a summary table talking about the kind of difficulties that children might have. So it might be a hearing issue, that the child is having. So if a child is having a hearing issue, and that might be glue ear, then they might be struggling to actually hear the difference between sounds. And if they can't hear the difference, then they're really going to struggle to be able to produce the difference. It might be that the child is actually struggling with their understanding of the language around those activities. They don't understand the vocabulary that is being used. And if a child is struggling, then they're not going to be able to concentrate for the same length of time as a child who's finding things easy. So it might be that your child is actually losing attention. So you might need to be breaking those activities down into smaller chunks so that things can happen quicker. Children can get through the activities more quickly. They're not having to sit for a long time and listen. If they are learning English as an additional language, then they are going to be having to try and decode what you're saying to them, translate it into home language, understand what the process is, and then come up with a response. So they might need longer time to respond, to come up with an answer, and they might need instructions breaking down. That's for children who have English as an additional language, or children who are having speech, language and communication difficulties. Shorter instructions, shorter length of activities, longer processing time for them to work out what it is that they've been asked to do, how to do it, and then putting that into an answer. And also, as I mentioned before, that it might be that the child is struggling to actually verbalise their answer because they don't have that clear speech. So they might be sounding like they can't do the activity, but actually it's because they just physically can't make that one particular sound that you're asking them to repeat. So I'd really encourage you to have a look at the website and have a look at that booklet, because it's also explains in quite a lot of detail the different types of difficulties that children can have with speech language communication needs, how that can manifest, if you like, within phonics activities, and things that you can do to support children to access phonics activities. Oh, and it's time for me to have a rest and let Kat take over.
Thanks, Lorna. So I am going to just whiz through these because I'm conscious that we are quickly running out of time. So as we've said at the beginning, in year one, we would expect pupils to be able to do a lot of these activities. But, as Lorna quite rightly said, a lot of these children who've come up to year one have missed out on forming some of those foundation skills, just through having to work from home and through COVID and everything. So it's always worth checking that if a child is struggling, it might be just because they haven't managed to get that foundation skill laid down. So first we're going to look at rhyming. So understanding rhyme means that children recognise that words are made up of several parts. We need a child to be able to recognise if words rhyme because they use familiar patterns to help them with spelling and reading. So for example, cat and hat both have an at sound pattern. A good activity that you can use, which also is quite easy to put together at home, is a fishing game. I've never met a child that doesn't love a fishing game. So you could give your child a picture of a cat and ask them to fish out all the pictures in the fishing bowl that rhyme with cat. So you might have hat, mat, pat, sat, rat. And then you'd be looking to see if they can identify them. So we think back to the communication pyramid. If you know a child has communication difficulties with listening and attention, you might find that they struggle with phonological awareness tasks, as they might struggle to listen closely to those sounds. And it's that real listening skill that helps children identify things like rhyme. So rhyming develops in stages. So first, a child needs to be able to recognize rhyming words in songs and stories. So star and R, high and sky. After that, a child needs to be able to split words into onset and rhyme, like Lorna covered earlier. So star and I and sk, I. Once the child can do that, they need to be able to blend sounds to produce new rhyming words, and they can be real or silly words. So you might have star, car, far, pa, da. Then which sounds go together? So odd one out tasks are really good for this. So hat, cat, car. can you identify which one doesn't go together? And this is a much more difficult task, and it becomes an almost impossible task if the skills to accurately recognise rhyming words haven't developed. So remember that in all tasks, it's also important to provide multisensory learning opportunities. So think about the visual prompts you're using. Think about whether you are getting up and doing something physically, because some children might need that release of energy in order to be able to form their thoughts properly. Have the next slide, please. So we've got a very quick activity for you, which I think a whiteboard might be coming up to do. We'd love you to try and just really quickly generate 5 words that rhyme with your name, and they can be real words or they can be silly words. So I've got it easy. My name's Kat, so I've got cat, pat, sat, rat, mat. You know, Lorna, we've got Lorna, Gorna, Rorna, Sorna, Morna. They don't have to be real words, but if when the whiteboard pops up, if you could, I think there's, yeah, you can follow the Padlet in the chat, and you can then just add your 5 silly words onto the thing. That'd be great. Brilliant. Bill, krill, trill, mill, fill, fab, amazing. Any more for any more? Fab. Lovely. Ellie Smelly Jelly, love it, brilliant. So, you know, I can already see that these are popping up really quickly. It's something that you're obviously not having any problem with. And it's quite simply because you have got those phonological awareness skills, which means that actually rhyming something isn't that difficult for you. You already know the rule that all you need to do to manipulate the word is to change the first sound and you've formed a new word. That's fantastic, brilliant. If I can move back to the slide, please, that'd be great. Thank you all for participating in that. Lovely. So the next thing we look at is the ability to segment words into syllables. So syllable segmentation is the ability to identify how many syllables or parts are in a word. Now, segmentation is a crucial skill to learn for spelling, because it's being able to split up words into separate sounds, and that helps children to work out longer or unfamiliar words. So a great activity that you can use, again, it'd be a really simple one to send home for parents, because we are aware that parents are having to do a lot of different activities at home, is an identifying syllable activity. We'd always stress identifying first. Children need to identify before they can use. So you can just get 3 boxes, a label with 1, 2, and 3, have lots of pictures of different words that have different numbers of syllables, and you could say, find me the picture with 2 sounds, and see if they can find the picture and put it in the correct box. If they can't find it, model the correct answer. So you can say, oh, look, there's a monkey. How many sounds? Monkey. 2 sounds, we need to put it in the box. So even if they don't know, show them the right answer, and this is how children are going to learn. As with rhyming, the ability to segment words into syllables develops in stages. So first, it's about listening for rhymes and patterns in beats. So we're not talking about words, we're just talking about developing those listening skills and the ability to segment into syllables. So you could put on some music and to clap along, and it's getting used to really tuning into those beats. Next, as above, but with words. So identifying the number of syllables, clapping out as you say it. So in things like going on a bear hunt, use something familiar for children, because they're not having to think about the words, then get to clap out words. And then the advanced in identifying number of syllables is to remove the visual supports. Now, you might find that you're not able to do that just yet, and that's absolutely fine. You know, it is important to scaffold children's skills and to provide those visual supports if they're needed. And now remember, like I said, children need to be identified before they can use. So if you know your child can't identify syllables, it is unrealistic to expect that they should be able to use and break down the syllables themselves. As children become familiar with syllables, they will begin to see syllable patterns in words and be able to break down longer words, which will begin to aid spelling. And eventually children will understand that syllables and sounds can be manipulated to create new words. If I could have the next slide, please. Lovely. Now, syllable blending. Blending is the ability to pull an individual sound or syllables back together to make a word. Now, it does come in stages, so actually syllable blending is going to be really difficult for a child until they've mastered syllable segmenting. So do bear that in mind as well. If a child hasn't mastered rhyme or syllable segmenting, syllable blending is going to be a really challenging task for them. So what you can do is you can get up and give them a really kind of physical something to do. Often children find if you add a physical action, it almost kind of makes it easier for them to process the activity. So if you think about cowboy, like words that are formed of two separate words, so you can get them to hold their fists up, cow, boy, then bring them together, cowboy, or car, park, bring them together, car park. So as we've discussed, recognizing the words and sentences can be broken down is called segmenting. Can I have the next slide, please? Lovely. So back to the whiteboard, please. I've given you examples of car park or cowboy. Can you think of any other examples of words that are made up of two separate words to form a longer word? I found this really challenging, so you might not be able to think of any others.
I got snow and shoe, snowshoe.
Oh, there we go.
And then to ice and cream and ice cream.
Teabag, brilliant one. Hadn't even thought of teabag. We often find children find it easier to wheelchair. Brilliant. Oh, see, my brain's clearly not working properly. So all these words are fab because actually they're already words that children know. You're asking them to join them together. So it's not like they're having to segment sounds. You're asking them to actually put two words together, which can be a nice one. Fab. Oh, there's loads. We're going to have to make a note of these, Lorna. Can I have the next slide, please, Laura? Okay, we've got the... Fab. That's great. Thanks, guys. All far more skilled than me at coming up with two words. So now we've got the ability to identify words beginning with the same sound. So remember again, identification tasks are generally much easier than production tasks. And establishing that sounds occur in different positions of words, so at the beginning, the middle, and the end, can help some children with the later task of segmenting whole words into isolated sound components. So again, another activity that can be done at home really easily is a what's in the bag activity. So you could put real objects in or pictures and see if you can get the child to sort objects by the sounds they start with. Maybe only start with two sounds, so two different objects. If you can do that really easily, add another. So then there's three different initial sounds they've got to sort out. And remember, we're talking about sounds, not spelling. So circle would have the same initial sound as sun, not cat. So we're talking about sounds, we're not talking about the graphemes here. And just to, there is a strong link between early phoneme awareness and later reading success. So it's a really important skill for children to develop. Can I have the next slide, please? As we're asking children to identify the sounds at the beginning of words, we also want children to be able to identify words ending with the same sounds. And this doesn't develop until around the age of 5. And that's when children will begin to segment words into onset, which is the sound before the vowel, and rhyme, which is the sound after the vowel. And they begin to blend phonemes to recognize a word. So an activity could be having a sound of the day, could be around the classroom, it could be a challenge that you make around the classroom to see if they can spot 2 or 3 different objects around the classroom that end in the same sound. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Lovely. And also we need to look at the ability to segment words into individual sounds. So children initially require verbal adult-led support through modelling and practice, and that's the same with anything. If a child's struggling, always provide the model so that they're actually getting, even if they can't answer themselves, they are hearing the correct answers. If they can't do the output, let's actually support the input for them. So when teaching word segmentation, it's important to not start too hard, really think about starting simple. So you might go for a CV word, then a VC word before you start introducing a CVC word. So a robot game, you could get them to pretend to be robots, get them to sound out the target words using their robot voice. So you can also use visual objects or anything that you think actually might help. It's important to pronounce phonemes very clearly and not add an sound. So a s is a s and it's not a s, because they're actually two very, very different sounds. So if we're talking about something like, if you're saying snake, it actually starts with a s sound, not a s sound. It takes some thinking about. You'll actually not be conscious of it until you really think about it. But it's often something that's worthwhile really, I'm trying to think of the right word, really talking to parents about, because it's something that they won't have ever thought about really. So, but it is important that there is that sound, not a m. So it's not like when you're doing the alphabet, it's the sound. Okay, and when a child can successfully break down a word into onset and rhyme, they can begin to understand that individual sounds within a word. For instance, there's cat is made up of 3 individual sounds, k, a. So that's a really important skill to use, and that usually develops around the age of 6, and that's when children begin to segment words into individual sounds. Okay, can I have the next slide, please?
I was just wanting to add there. That we've been thinking about parents doing phonological awareness activities at home, and how some parents can struggle to really understand the way that we might say sounds. Parents aren't necessarily going to say them in the same way. So maybe sharing some videos of you kind of going through the sounds that you're sending home that week and exactly how to say them, so that the parents would be able to copy how you're saying things. And again, be aware of parents who might have English as an additional language. Are parents going to be able to say those sounds if they're doing those activities at home? Sorry for butting in.
That's all right, Lorna, it's your slide now.
I wasn't ready for that. So, I mean, ability to segment words. We're getting longer words with more letters in them, and obviously it's going to follow the same pattern. But you need to make sure that children can do this segmenting with easier words, with consonant, vowel, consonant, for example, before you moved on to consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant. So you just need to make sure that they've had lots of practice with the easier words before you start moving on to the more complicated ones. And we were an example of an activity is kind of getting children having a range of pictures or objects and getting children to pass you things where you're spelling out the word. So can they kind of hear those words, those sounds, and put them together and be able to understand the word? That's quite a complicated activity that we're giving an example there. Children need to have lots of those underpinning skills before they can move on and do this sort of activity. Can I have the next slide, please? So kind of the activity before and this one, we're moving into that sound blending, where we're actually able to recognize the individual sounds within a word and then start to put them back together again. And as Kat mentioned, they need to have lots of modeling and lots of examples given to them, and the ability to then copy what you're saying before they're going to really understand how to do this for themselves. And we can do it with lots of familiar words. So, you know, as you're you know, doing activities in the classroom, if your children are in with you, or if parents are out going for a walk, you know, they can talk about the things that they're seeing and then break those words down and blend them together. Can I have the next slide? So this was just an activity for you to maybe share with us any strategies. So Kat already kind of demonstrated the robot arms, but you could do tiger feet. So you could do cat, where you're breaking it down and then doing your tiger feet. You can do disco arms, cat, for the dancers among you. There's a link in the chat for if you've got any ideas that, oh, superhero hands, I like it for the boys. If you've got any ideas, it'd be really good if you could follow that link to the whiteboard, and then you'd be able to add that in. And what we're going to do is we'll take do a PDF of the whiteboard, so that we'll send that out with the recording. So if any of you have got other really useful ideas that other people might be able to steal, then they'd be able to share it. Am I right in thinking, Laura, that the link and the whiteboard are still going to be active even if we're not looking at it?
Yeah, that's right. So you can use the link after the session's finished. It'll still be available.
So if you've got any really useful ideas, which would be really nice to share and being able to pick your brains, because I know lots of you are going to have been teaching phonics for many years, and you'll have got loads of really good ideas, and it's really nice to share these activities with other practitioners so that they can steal your ideas, basically.
Laura, and Laura, sorry to interrupt. There's just there's not a sharing function on the. I'm not sure if other people have found this, but I can't currently add any. Not that I personally have any tips of knowledge, but I can't currently add anything onto the Padlet. I'm not sure if other colleagues are finding that as well. But there might be a sharing functionality.
Okay, I'll check the settings, Hugh, and then I'll make sure the links are sent out to everybody afterwards, but ensure that they are editable.
Perfect, thanks, Laura. And then maybe in the meantime, I know people are already putting stuff in the chat, which is great. So I'll make sure we copy and paste those into the Padlet as well.
That's brilliant, thank you. So the next kind of or another skill in phonological awareness is that being able to manipulate those sounds in words. So being able to swap sounds. So we've already kind of talked about lots of these in earlier elements, but kind of helping parents to think of ideas. So swapping the initial sound. So just choosing a word and then moving the first sound and putting another sound in. It kind of creates those rhyme strings like cat, bat, pat, or being able to swap those sounds at the end. So we just take away the sound at the end and put another one in, like cat, cap, car. And then the harder one is swapping those sounds in the middle of a word, because beginnings and ends are easier for children to understand, but being able to swap the kind of sounds in the middle is a bit more of a tricky activity for children to be able to do. You could even, if you were swapping the sounds at the beginning of a word, rather than producing rhyme strings, you could do something like going on a listening walk or a talking walk, where you just choose a sound that you're going to swap. So everything that we see today, we're going to put a t in front of. So we're going out the door instead of the door. It's a door, tour. We're going down the path, tath. We open the gate, tate. The only thing is, if you're going to share that with parents, just be aware that they might throw up the odd tricky word. As I was going through this, as I was practicing, and then thought, oh, what are you likely to see? You're going to see a bird, turd. Okay, that's just by accident the way that it throws up that more challenging word, but just warn parents that that might happen. So over to cat. Oh, hold on, have I missed a slide? Sorry, missed a slide there. Talked about letter sound correspondence, or rather I didn't. When we're trying to make those links between the letters and the sounds, those shapes that go with the sounds, having that multisensory learning opportunity is really, really important, so that children get lots of practice of seeing and experiencing how to make those shapes, and lots of repetition using different materials. So not just using pens or pencils or crayons to actually do writing, but writing letters in your sand tray, in your shaving foam, in your gloop, using lolly sticks with the shaving foam or whatever. And children need to have lots of practice of being able to link what they're hearing and what they're seeing and the things that go together. Being able to kind of, if you have a couple of pictures that represent those letter shapes, so if you've got an action, a picture, the actual letter shape and the sound, that's multisensory learning. And children, you could start off by having the shapes and the pictures out. You make the sound, and the child has got to point to the picture. That's a bit of a boring example, but you could have pictures that have got their own car parks. The child drives a car up to park on the P car park or on the K car park. If you've got dinosaurs, then they could put a dinosaur, you know, give a dinosaur to the sound. You could build a tower, so they're putting a brick on whether they hear a P sound or whether they hear that K sound. They're putting a tower and see which tower builds up more quickly. Start off with just a couple of sounds and letters that the child has to hear and link that sound to the letter shape, and then you can build it up with 3 or more. That's when I was supposed to talk about the listening sounds, but hey ho. Now it's class.
So just to finish off, because I'm aware that we have run a little bit over, so I do apologise if we're keeping you. The last things to think about are how we can support children's phonological awareness. So think about the opportunities that you're giving your children within daily routines to listen carefully, just talk about what they can hear and what they can see and what they can do. Using picture prompts to remind the children things like being a good listener, you know, sitting nicely. These could be displayed on a wall or on a soft toy or in a quiet listening den. A listening area is often really good if you keep it free from over distracting wall displays, posters and resources. Keep it very kind of neutral, because sometimes children kind of get over stimulated by lots of noise, lots of pictures, and actually that takes away their ability to listen closely. So having a nice quiet area where you could go to do some really intense listening is often a good idea. A small group size is preferable. I know it's not always possible, but it is preferable, and that allows children to have sufficient time to participate in and respond to the activity. And if you have the ability to, try and think about splitting your groups in terms of your children's attention levels. Using gestures, often very good, such as a finger to the lips for shh, hand on the ear for good listening. And this also helps children that don't always understand language, but they will understand a gesture. So you're being quite inclusive for those children. And also consider home languages. If parents or carers speak languages other than English, find out the word for listen in the school or in the community, and you can use that when appropriate. And again, that can be a really supportive strategy to use. Okay, last slide, please. So this final activity, what I'd like you to do is just spend a couple of minutes reading both rhyme 1 and rhyme 2. So I'll just give you a really short amount of time to read through both of those. Then when you're done, if you could just pop in the chat whether you found rhyme 1 or rhyme 2, which rhyme did you have to concentrate harder in order to read? Fab. It looks like everyone's the same as me and found rhyme 1 far more challenging to read. But I'm sure actually all of you were able to read rhyme 1 and work it out. And like one of the slides said at the beginning, over 50% of the English language is full of anomalies. It doesn't follow those rules. So in rhyme 2, you have got words like where and fair, which can have different spellings, but they all follow that same phonological pattern. They don't change in production. However, if you've got break and freak, they're basically, but they don't go along with that rule where you just change the first sound and they rhyme. They're completely different. So, you know, imagine if you were trying to read rhyme 1, but you didn't have those early phonological skills that allowed you to know the rule pattern, but also to know that words don't always follow the rule pattern. So that's just something to kind of think about and kind of really kind of focus us and think, actually, why are these early skills so important for children? So I'm aware we have run over, but if you've got any questions, now's the time. We'll try our best to answer them.
What I might suggest we do, guys, is if you do have time and do have questions, then please do pop them in the chat, and we'll stay on for a couple of extra minutes. But we'll tie up for the majority of you now, because I'm conscious we have gone over. It's fantastic to see that more than 100 of you just stay on for an extra 5 minutes. So an excellent evidence that session was really much appreciated. So thank you very much, Kat and Lorna, for a fantastic workshop. Much appreciated. We've just put an evaluation link in the chat now. I have to give a massive shout out and thank you to Laura for all the work she's been doing behind the scenes to make all of this series happen. I hope you guys have appreciated it and enjoyed them. It's been fab seeing so many of you on the call so many times. We're really keen to kind of build on this community of practice, and we'll be in touch soon with future events that we'd like to involve you guys in, including a potential peer-to-peer support model. So keep an eye out for emails on that front. But thank you all so much again for your time. It's such a busy time in the term, and thank you again to Kat and Lorna.
Thank you. And sorry I went over. Speech therapists love to talk. We're around.
It's in your DNA.
Yeah.
Thanks all.